3 years into my marriage with Pei Ji, a noblewoman came from the capital. She told me that Pei Ji is the current crown prince, and that she, in fact, is Pei Ji's wife. I opened my mouth but couldn't find the words. The tea I had spilled on my hand revealed my bewilderment. Awan. Pei Ji looked at the back of my hand, which was red and swollen from the burn, with concern. Before he could come over, he was engulfed in the embrace of fragrant robes and delicate features. Unlike earlier, when she had calmly asserted her claim, Feng Ziyun was now crying with tears and a sorrowful expression, gazing at Pei Ji with moist eyes. "Your Highness, it's been 3 whole years. It's been so hard for me to find you." Her voice was even more touching than her appearance, mournful and desolate, making even me feel pity. Pei Ji was deeply moved. His hands, which had been at his sides, slowly rose. Then, gently, they drew together until he held Feng Ziyun tightly in his arms. "I'm sorry for causing you worry." Feng Ziyun shook her head. "Your Highness need not feel apologetic. As husband and wife, it's my duty to worry about you. I'm just grateful that the heavens have restored your memory. Otherwise—" Her voice suddenly turned sorrowful, like a cuckoo crying blood. "I'm afraid I couldn't have held on much longer in this vast East Palace." After saying this, she seemed to want to pour out all the hardships of the past 3 years, sobbing uncontrollably on Pei Ji's shoulder. I looked at the tears staining Pei Ji's shoulder, like spilled water that couldn't be recovered. It had drowned my future. But unlike Aunt Lee, who might have threatened her husband and his mistress with knives, I couldn't do that. After all, I looked up at the seemingly perfect couple. I saw Pei Ji, his gentle demeanor almost overflowing from his eyes and brows. The bitterness inside me surged uncontrollably. After all, what? I asked myself. The answer was so close, like a blade that had left my heart in tatters. After all, they're a couple too. Even though I had once stood with him before heaven and earth, had promised to grow old together, and was seen as his honorable wife by everyone, none of that mattered now that he had chosen to be the crown prince and marry Sierra. I gave a self-deprecating smile, then turned to leave the room to this long-separated couple. Pei Ji had clearly noticed me. He called out to me as I was leaving. "Awan." His voice was very low. Yet, I could detect a hint of trembling, as if feeling guilty or trying to keep me from leaving. In the past, whenever he called me, even if I was busy, I would put everything down and reply with a smile. "Pei Lang, I'm here." But this time, I didn't turn around. I thought, perhaps as a country woman, I didn't know how to respond to the exalted crown prince. So, I could only walk quickly away, trying to leave this place that could no longer be my home. But then, my hand was grabbed, as soft and delicate as Pei Ji's. Feng Ziyun, with her tears not yet dry but already smiling, said, "Is this the savior of your highness? She seems like a nice person. If you're willing, why not come back to the capital with us and keep me company in the East Palace?" I looked at her face, free of any jealousy, and was momentarily stunned. I didn't understand how she could calmly share her husband with another woman. Maybe this was the demeanor of a crown princess. But I couldn't. I couldn't share my husband with others, and I couldn't and wouldn't become a nameless member in his grand palace. I pulled my hand away, lowered my body, and bowed deeply. "Thank you for your kindness, your highness. But as a common countrywoman, I'm afraid I don't belong in such high society. I wouldn't want to trouble you and the crown prince any further. Moreover," between me and his highness, I gazed into his increasingly cold eyes where I saw no future for myself. So, I had to find another path, one without Pei Ji. I smiled lightly and said decisively, "It has never had anything to do with me."
2.
As expected, with dusk approaching, there was a soft knock on the door. Following that tentative, almost imperceptible knock, my eyes fell on the shadow of a figure standing proudly like a pine tree, reflected on the paper window. Just a glance was enough for me to look away. I bowed my head and decisively blew out the candle. I had already made my position clear, so there was nothing more to say to him. Moreover, Since country folk rise early, I had no reason to argue over something already decided and disturb the neighbor's peace for half the night. After all, he had stormed off back to the capital to be the crown prince after a heated argument. I still had to live my life here. With that thought, I tightened the quilt and prepared to sleep. But the knocking grew more urgent, as if it would not cease until something was broken. Even my large yellow dog in the yard barked a few times in alarm. Reluctantly, I lit a lamp and opened the door. What? Before I could finish, Pei Ji's darkened gaze filled with a surprise on my face. By the time I realized, he had already forced his way in. The flickering candlelight made my eyes hurt, but it was nothing compared to the cold and sharp expression on Pei Ji's face as he pressed closer. What did you mean by has nothing to do with me today? Pei Ji's voice was husky. I parted my lips, but Pei Ji wasn't interested in my answer. He didn't give me a chance to respond, tightening his grip on my shoulders as if forcing the words he wanted to hear out of me. He demanded, "What do you mean has nothing to do with me?" "Zhongwan, we have sworn before heaven and earth. We have been physically intimate. How can it suddenly become has nothing to do with me?" As he spoke, his brows furrowed, and his eyes were reddened, as if he had suffered a great injustice. It was more pitiful than Feng Jiyun. I used to be moved by this act, but now I was unmoved. I merely replied, "Pei Ji, I won't be a concubine." "Won't be a concubine?" His eyes flared with anger and his voice rose. "Do you want to be the crown princess instead?" I stared at Pei Ji's clear, bright eyes. Those eyes that were once filled with tenderness and deep affection were now occupied by shock and disdain, as if they were looking at an utterly greedy woman. I felt a dryness in my throat. Indeed, I wanted to sever ties with Pei Ji completely. But that didn't mean I no longer loved him. The deep affection and passionate love we shared couldn't be forgotten so easily. His words, his gaze, even his presence felt like a poisonous blade, stirring up the pain of having my heart carved out. I looked at him in disbelief. He really thinks this of me. It turns out that a change of memory and status can alter someone so profoundly. Suppressing the bitterness, I revealed my disappointment. I never said I wanted to be the crown princess. Awan. Pei Ji's expression softened, and he sighed, his tone becoming gentler. He embraced me from behind, with a hint of coaxing. "Don't play games with me, Pei Ji." I pried his hand off and said seriously, "I'm not playing games with you. I've said it before, I won't be a concubine." Realizing that I was not just being stubborn, Pei Ji's expression turned serious. "Won't be a concubine," his brows slightly raised as if seeing a huge joke. "Zhongwan, who do you want to be the wife of?" "Who?" He stubbornly grasped my hand back into his. "Would dare marry you?" "Awan." He bent his brows slightly, speaking persuasively. "Come back to the capital with me. I'll give you a respectable position. When I ascend the throne, you'll be a consort, even a favored consort, only second to Jiyun. This honor and wealth as a concubine, does it really compare to being the lawful wife of a commoner? Besides, as a woman who has lost her husband and is alone, how difficult will your future be?" "Awan, how can I bear to see you like this?" Unfortunately, his grandiloquent words only earned a cold laugh from me. I wrenched my hand away from his. I am not a pampered girl from the capital. I was born in the fields, grew up under the shade of green trees, and I am used to hard work. My strength is no less than his. Pei Ji staggered from the force, barely steadying himself as I said, "How can you bear it, Pei Ji? When you sent the letter to the capital, did you ever think I would lose my husband? I understand your high status and your reluctance to stay in the countryside. So, if you want to leave, I won't stop you. But I don't want to go. I don't want to be a wife surrounded by people. I just want to be an ordinary farmer. How can you just take me away? Do you think I can't live without you?" "Wakeu, Pei Ji. No one can't live without anyone else. Before you left, I managed perfectly as a lonely woman. I can weave, farm, and fish. Even if, as you say, no man dares to marry me, Zhongwan, I won't starve." "Pei Ji," I lifted my chin. "I won't starve. So, You don't need to feel guilty. I can live well without you." As I spoke, I opened the door. The evening breeze was cool, but it couldn't match the chill in my heart. Choking back tears, I said, "It was you who wanted to be with Xiaorongyu, and you were the one who gave up on me first. I, Zhengwan, only ever wanted to be Pei Ji's wife." Pei Ji looked at me resolutely, knowing that my decision was final. He stopped arguing and stepped forward. In the moonlight, the soft glow from his hand fell on my lower abdomen. Pei Ji lowered his gaze and smiled, his determination evident. "And what about this? Awan, do you want it to be born without a father?" 3. I thought that only by remaining speechless, hesitating, and ultimately compromising could I satisfy this crown prince. But he was mistaken about me. The whole world is the king's land, and all subjects are his. I am indeed his subject. But if he wants to be the chess player, I will never be his pawn. Looking at his self-satisfied expression, I scoffed. "Pei Huai, so you've planned this out, haven't you?" "Yes, I've planned it out," I said, my eyes trembling slightly as I laid his scheme bare. "As a mother, even if I hold a grudge against you, I still have to think about the child." "Right, Your Highness." Pei Huai's eyes were steady, neither admitting nor denying. But he must have exhausted his patience with a countrywoman like me, speaking his mind without reservation. Each word was more self-serving than the last. Pei Huai accused me. "Awan, what did I do wrong for you to treat me like this?" "I'm not abandoning you. I just want a better life for you and the child. What exactly are you dissatisfied with that makes you want to sever ties completely?" Or, Pei Huai's eyes were filled with a knowing contempt. "Do you still want to be the crown princess, still longing for that position?" I gave a faint, bitter smile. I slightly lowered my gaze to hide the flickering light in my eyes. I said with a kushao, "Pei Huai, your words really hurt." With that, I fell silent. I knew that no matter how many times I repeated it, Pei Huai would never believe what I truly wanted. In his eyes as the crown prince Xiaorongyu, I was now just a countrywoman trying to use my pregnancy to make demands. But he had forgotten. He had forgotten that when I carried him back from the cliff, he was just a severely injured, penniless youth. I had stayed awake, using all our savings to take him to every clinic in town, begging doctors until I snatched him back from the brink of death. He had promised to marry me, but I didn't want to argue over these things with him anymore. Now I just wanted to distance myself from him. I didn't want him to hurt my heart anymore. I said to Pei Ji, "I will think about it," thinking about how to leave him. It wasn't a difficult decision. That night, I slipped out of the courtyard. I went to Aunt Lee's house, borrowed a cow, and hitched up the cart. Aunt Lee knew that someone well-dressed had come to our house during the day and must have been important. But she didn't ask any questions. Aunt Lee simply packed 2 large bundles onto the cart. Wan. Aunt Lee stood in the long night, her face already hard to distinguish. She waved at me. "Come back soon." My nose tingled, and I wanted to wave back but ultimately didn't turn around again. I drove the cart down the familiar path I had traveled thousands of times. There were few lights in the countryside at night. The only guidance was the moonlight scattered across the intersecting fields. Although it was a clear night with a bright moon, the rustling of the wind through the trees sent a shiver down my spine. I felt a bit anxious, but with no one to confide in, I could only rest my hand on my abdomen. The baby, only 3 months old, as Aunt Lee said, was still smaller than the beans she used to grind. But in the dark and unpredictable night, it was my only support. It was my courage to face the darkness. Looking at my abdomen, I suddenly recalled Pei Ji's words. I tightened my grip. Although I knew the baby couldn't understand or even hear me, I still said, "If you want to blame your mother, then do so. Your mother also doesn't want you to come into this world without a father's guidance." However, I pressed my lips together, my eyes filled with unrelenting bitterness. "We only have one life. Your mother cannot settle for less just because she has something to offer, trapped in a golden cage for a lifetime. And you too. When you're older and understand more, if you still desire power and wealth. Your mother won't stop you." After saying this, I felt a bit relieved, and urged the cart to go faster. But as I looked up, my pupils contracted. The once quiet countryside was now ablaze with torches, as bright as daylight. Pei Ji stood ahead. The firelight didn't burn away the malice in his eyes. Instead, it only heightened the coldness, leaving no trace of the light in my eyes. Pei Ji smiled lightly. Awan, where are you going? 4. This was a question that didn't require an answer. After all, I was no longer in a position to respond. Under my gaze, Pei Ji raised his hand. The black-clad men withdrew like a tide, and behind Pei Ji were villagers bound tightly. Aunt Li, with her mouth gagged, desperately shook her head at me. Her meticulously arranged hair had become disheveled, and even her cherished silver hairpin had fallen to the ground. But she didn't even glance at it, only shaking her head fervently. She wanted me to escape. But I looked at the road, which was now blocked tightly, and at the villagers, who looked like lambs awaiting slaughter. My legs seemed rooted to the spot, unable to move. Pei Ji made no move either, and had no intention of letting me go. When he brought out Chen Xie, the village soothsayer, I knew. Someone from the capital, experienced in the darkest ways, would use the most cruel methods to torment me. He wanted to manipulate me, to force me to submit and admit my mistakes. But he was wrong again. Just as I once saw Pei Ji as gentle and harmonious with the neighbors, I thought he would not use the villagers, who lived with us daily, as leverage. Pei Ji also forgot that this was not the capital, where power was built with blood and flesh. Here, people cared for each other. So Pei Ji was disappointed. When he removed the rag from Chen Xie's mouth, laughing as Chen Xie shouted defiantly, he did not expect to hear what he anticipated. Wan, go. Quickly leave. You can't go back with him. You'll die. Hurry. Before Chen Xie could finish, he was angrily kicked to the ground by Pei Ji, falling silent. Pei Ji. Pei Ji got what he wanted. I could harden my heart and start over. But I could not abandon my conscience and forsake the villagers. For a lonely orphan like me, the villagers who had cared for and supported me for decades were family longer than Pei Ji had been. Facing his satisfied gaze, I walked over. One step, then another. Though walking towards the light, I felt as if I was being engulfed by darkness. Awan. Pei Ji gently held my hand, his calloused fingers pressing heavily on my burned palm. I knew he was reminding me, if I rejected his warmth, the consequence would be a river of blood in the village. But I was still unwilling. This was exactly what I did not want. I ended up crying. I said, Pei Ji, you're truly despicable. He didn't care, his smile deepening. Awan, you were the one who chose to leave first. Looking at his smile, like a whirlpool dragging me into an abyss. I could only give up struggling. I felt like a puppet being manipulated, allowing Pei Ji to lead me to the luxurious carriage. He even helped me tidy my hair and put on my outer garments like a husband would. Don't think about leaving me. In this life, even if you die, you can only die in the capital, in front of me. His hand caressed my face, touching every inch with his persistent gaze, devoid of any love, only satisfaction at having reclaimed something. I smiled bitterly. It turned out that in the eyes of the crown prince, I was not even considered a lover. Wan Wan, the heart-wrenching cry echoed through the countryside. I looked back in panic to see Aunt Li, tear-streaked, chasing the carriage. You can't go. Chen Xie said you mustn't go. Wan Wan, trust us. You can't go. You'll die, Wan Wan. My tears fell uncontrollably, but more than that, I feared Pei Ji's impatience might end Aunt Li's life. So, I could only do as he wished and plead with him. Pei Ji, stop the carriage. I trembled. Please, let me say a few words to Aunt Li. After that, I will go back with you. The moment I got out of the carriage, Aunt Li rushed to me. Wan Wan, you can't go, Chen Xie said. Aunt Li. I smiled and interrupted her. You always said Chen Uncle's predictions were unreliable. This time, don't believe them. Believe me, Aunt Li. I looked towards a village, resolute. I will come back. I will definitely come home.
5.
I became Zheng Lianyuan in the East Palace. Pei Ji had wanted to give me the position of Liangdi, but he too had to be subject to someone's decision. His birth mother, the Empress of Daong, disdained my lowly origins and deemed me unworthy of the title. I didn't care about such inherent disdain and contempt. Just as I knew that Pei Ji was deliberately tormenting me since I arrived at the East Palace. He forbade the palace servants from providing me with good food and clothing, and even denied me a kind face. Pei Ji wanted to break my spirit from the outside in, eliminating any thoughts of escape. He wanted me to understand that he was my only support, and thus, he wanted me to bow my head, submit, and become his subordinate. But I didn't care at all. I never had any expectations, so there was no disappointment. I would eat every meal served to me with gratitude, wrap myself tightly in every garment to keep warm, and take care of myself as best as I could. I wanted to live well, live until the day I could return home. The crown princess was very virtuous. Seeing her husband troubled by a woman every day, she came to mediate. Feng Jiyun's face was adorned with a smile as she comforted me like a child, still at odds with His Highness. As she spoke, she took my hand and applied ointment gently. This is Uni ointment, the best for scars and marks. I saw you had burned your hand the other day, so I brought some for you. Looking at her with her gentle smile, I found I couldn't even utter a refusal. I could only softly say, "Thank you, Crown Princess." Feng Jiyun nodded slightly. "If you want to thank someone, thank His Highness. It's because of him that I can think of you." Seeing that I remained silent, Feng Jiyun sighed helplessly. "Don't blame His Highness anymore. It was my idea. I was afraid that mentioning it abruptly would reveal His Highness's identity, so I thought it would be better to wait until the situation was settled before telling you. I didn't expect it would lead to a rift between you and His Highness." After saying this, she stood up to apologize. I quickly stopped her. She didn't need to apologize to me, and I knew better. How could she possibly be the master of Pei Ji? It was just a matter of taking the blame. Seeing me calm down a little, the crown princess's smile deepened. She pulled me down to sit, appearing as intimate as close friends. She asked, "Zhang Lianyuan, when His Highness was attacked, people from both inside and outside the palace searched day and night for 3 whole months with no trace. I'm curious. Where exactly did you meet His Highness?" I felt like an invisible hand was gripping my throat, forcing me to remain silent. I looked at the high walls and the gate far higher than my home. Her questions seemed so foreign. Where, indeed, did I meet Pei Ji? And where did I lose the Pei Ji, who was filled with only me? 6. I vaguely remember that the day I encountered Pei Ji was wonderfully sunny. Everything bathed in this boundless light seemed beautiful, even the smallest things. But Pei Ji was not. Under the bright sun, his flesh and blood were torn apart, and his deep wounds looked terrifying even from a distance. I initially didn't want to get involved. His injuries were so severe that life or death was uncertain. If there were any grievances or debts, I couldn't bear them. But after walking a few steps, I turned back. After all, it was a life. He was heavy, and carrying him was exhausting. By the time I returned to the village, the sun had already set. Aunt Lee was by the stream washing clothes. She was a good person with a sharp tongue but a soft heart, scolding Chen Xie for his endless complaints while still helping him with his laundry. When she saw me carrying a bloodied man, her smile froze on her face. She frowned and examined Pei Ji, saying, "Wan, you shouldn't pick up wild men from outside." Despite her words, she set aside her work and helped me get Pei Ji home. Pei Ji was not only severely injured, but also had a high fever that wouldn't subside. The doctor came, only doing a basic cleaning of his wounds, and advised me to take him to the town for proper treatment as soon as possible. Looking at the darkening night, I hesitated. But as I gazed at his pale and pained face, I couldn't help but think of myself. I didn't know why my parents abandoned me, but I knew if the villagers had ignored me, I would have starved or been eaten by wild beasts. They had helped me, raising me with their food and care, even though I was a stranger to them. So, out of compassion and reason, I couldn't just stand by and watch. I borrowed a cart and set out into the vast night with Pei Ji. Along the way, I repeatedly counted the copper coins in my pocket, saying, "When you wake up, make sure to pay me back. This is the money for seeds for next spring. If you don't, I'll haunt you as a starving ghost every day, frightening you, making sure your conscience is troubled for the rest of your life." Don't worry, I've counted. There are 320 copper coins in total. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and continued, "Once you've paid me back, we'll be even." But when I saw his eyes, which should have been sparkling and lively, now wide open with confusion and bewilderment like a flowing stream, my eyelids twitched. Then I heard him say, "Who are you? Where is this?" Who am I? I knew then that the money for next year's seeds was probably lost. The doctor said he had hit his head and lost his memory. I anxiously asked the doctor when he would recover. The doctor, having no miraculous remedies, left me with a leave it to fate and took all 320 copper coins from my pocket. When I brought Pei Ji back to the village, Aunt Li was scolding Chen Xie at the village entrance. Upon seeing Pei Ji, Aunt Li's eyes lit up. She grabbed Pei Ji's hand excitedly, saying, "So this is the man you brought back that day. He's truly handsome. What's his name? Where does he live? Is he married?" Pei Ji's clear eyes were once again clouded with confusion. He shook his head. "I can't remember." I tugged at Aunt Li's sleeve and whispered, "He has amnesia." Aunt Li's eyes brightened even more. "This is perfect, Wan Wan. I think this gentleman is much more handsome than Zhao Er's son." But with his current state, Aunt Li smacked her lips. "He might not be much help with work. But it's all right. You're so diligent and capable. Whether he works or not is just an added bonus. Why not take him as a husband?" Aunt Li. I knew Aunt Li was concerned for me. I had once been romantically involved with Zhao Yan, but his family looked down on me, a penniless orphan. After publicly humiliating me, they arranged another marriage for him. Aunt Li couldn't stand it and scolded them at their doorstep for 3 whole days. Now, with a handsome man in sight, she naturally wanted me to have a bit of pride. But looking at Pei Ji's innocent and harmless eyes, my face flushed. I lowered my head, wanting to stop Aunt Li from having such thoughts, only to hear Chen Xie sternly say, "Stop matchmaking recklessly." He stood up and pointed to the sky. "Marriage is determined by fate. If you act this way, you'll be struck by lightning. It's better to let me calculate a fortune for Wan Wan." Aunt Li spat at him. "Go away. Your fortunes have never been accurate. You once said I would." Would. Aunt Li's gaze froze and she fell silent, taking Chen Xie's dirty clothes and leaving. As the afterglow of sunset faded, only Chen Xie's sighs remained. 7. I didn't actually have Chen Xie calculate my fortune. After all, having a beautiful husband like that was just a tale for amusement in storybooks. I simply asked Pei Ji, "Uncle Chen, do you know how to write Pei Ji?"
Pei Ji.
It was the only word he could think of when he woke up. Unfortunately, I couldn't read, and he couldn't remember which characters made up his name, so I had to ask the literate Chen Xie. After some thought, Chen Xie wrote out the name Pei Ji for the next 3 years with a dry twig in the dirt. But later, I found out that this was not his name but his courtesy name. It wasn't Pei Ji but Pei Ji. Pei Ji. It meant the Emperor's grace, benefiting the world. I happily took these 2 characters and went back, planning to ask around the next day about a young master named Pei Ji, who was missing. Although he was wrapped in coarse cloth now, the material was once fine and smooth. He must be from a wealthy family, and surely he would repay me the money for the seeds. Seeing me so cheerful, Pei Ji was no longer as timid as before and asked, "Miss Wan, what is a husband?" My smile faltered, and all traces of cheerfulness vanished. I hurried a few steps ahead of him, blushing, and said, "A husband is someone who will be with me for life, knowing and cherishing me." "So," he asked earnestly, "Aunt Li wants us to be together for life, right?" "Not us." I was so flustered that I hurriedly tried to cover his mouth. But when I touched his soft lips, it felt like touching a hot iron, and I quickly pulled away. Miss Wan, as the afterglow of the sunset bathed us in its red hues, I looked down, unable to meet his gaze, stammering, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Don't take Aunt Lee's words to heart. I'll go out tomorrow to find her family. Remember, I added, thinking of the money. You owe me 320 copper coins, so make sure your family pays me back. He remained silent, just staring at me. The evening breeze stirred the wheat fields, creating waves of golden light that mingled with the sunset. It also made his eyes sparkle, and the scene was enchanting. He asked, "What about after the money is paid back? Can I still see Miss Wan?" I opened my mouth, feeling a fluttering sensation that was overwhelming my reason until it felt like a dam breaking. I turned away, trying to steady my trembling voice. "First, pay me back. We need to settle the account first." But once entangled, it's hard to truly clear things up. After failing to find Pei Ji's relatives, I was so anxious that tears nearly fell. Miss Wan. Looking up, I saw Pei Ji's refined face. He was tall and stood before me like a shadow blocking the sun. Yet his actions and gaze were gentle. He said, "If we really can't find them, I have a solution." "What solution?" I pouted. "I will repay the debt with my body." I retorted, "You might as well say you'll offer yourself." "Is that possible?" Still overwhelmed by my worries, I replied, "What do you mean by possible?" "Possible. To be your husband." Pei Ji's eyes seemed to hold a sky full of stars, shining brilliantly. He spoke softly and firmly. "I will learn to chop wood, farm, and fish. I will learn everything others can do, and I won't let you suffer alone. I will also understand, cherish, and accompany you for this lifetime, never separating." Is this enough to be Miss Wan's husband? Looking into his eyes, I felt like I had found a source of support and a home. With the smoke rising and the evening breeze blowing, it was the wind, the flag, and my heart that were all stirred. I parted my lips and said, "All right." But life was still poor, and our wedding clothes were borrowed from Aunt Lee. Pei Ji was displeased with my plain appearance. He gently touched my hair, deep in thought. The next day, he went up the mountain to chop wood. For 10 whole days, he got up before dawn to chop wood and returned at sunset with a full load. I joked, "Even though it's our honeymoon, Pei Ji, you don't need to bring back so much firewood." He just smiled and said nothing. Another day at sunset, he adorned my hair with a hairpin. His brows were tired, but he still smiled and said to me, "I knew that Miss One would look good with a hairpin." I was initially stunned, and then my nose tingled with emotion. I felt sorry for him and said, "Why buy these things? I don't mind." He smiled and pulled me into his embrace, saying, "I don't want to make you feel wronged." We married in the spring. That night, a passionate Pei Ji made promises over and over. Wan, in this life, in this world, in every lifetime, I will never betray you. I couldn't find the words to respond elegantly, so I bit his shoulder and swore, "Pei Ji, if you dare betray me, deceive me, or hide things from me, in every lifetime, I will never forgive you."
8.
But these things I couldn't tell Feng Jiyun. It would be too cruel for her as a wife. For me, what was once so beautiful now feels like exquisite pain. I said softly, "It's just a coincidence." Feng Jiyun, being perceptive, saw I didn't want to talk further and stood up to leave. But as she was about to say her farewells, a strong scent of perfume suddenly filled the air. Looking towards the door, I saw a woman with a pale complexion and long, slender eyebrows and eyes approaching us gracefully. She was beautiful, but her voice sounded like glass shards scraping together, making one frown. Ah, what a coincidence. Zheng Liangyuan's door is actually open. Come, let me see what this fairy looks like. Her gaze swept over my face and she sneered. It's nothing special. Feng Jiyun's face turned awkward. This is Zhao Lianyuan Fengyue. Zhao Fengyue seemed to have just noticed Feng Jiyun standing here as well and slightly bowed. This concubine wishes the crown princess well. As she straightened up, her eyes scanned my swollen belly. Her previously mocking expression suddenly turned venomous, like a wolf in a mountain ravine, chilling and eerie. Her face was unable to hide the smile, and her eyes showed jealousy as she stared at my belly. "How many months along are you?" Feeling uncomfortable under her gaze, I instinctively protected my belly and replied nervously, 6 months. 6 months. She laughed lowly, like a ferocious beast baring its fangs, sending a shiver down one's spine. "Looks like it might be a boy, judging by the pointed shape of the belly." "Crown Princess, this is the firstborn of the East Palace. Since ancient times," she touched the peony flower in her hair, "it has always been about establishing the legitimate heir. Zhao Yangyuan, your future is limitless." Even if I didn't understand manners or social rules, I knew Zhao Fengyue was deliberately provoking Feng Zhiyun. But I didn't speak up to help. After all, no one here would believe anyone else's words. I just said honestly, the gender of the baby is still unknown. Zhao Yangyuan shouldn't make presumptions. Feng Zhiyun added, "Whether it's a boy or girl, it's still His Highness's first child. A son is good, but a daughter is also the prince's precious jewel. It's better than having nothing in the belly." "You, Zhao Yangyuan, I'm not well and have had no good news after many years of treatment. You're in good health, so it's better for you to get pregnant with a boy or a girl soon. Otherwise," Feng Zhiyun smiled sarcastically, "it would be unfortunate to be criticized like me." I raised my eyebrows slightly. "Feng Zhiyun, having difficulty in giving birth?" Zhao Fengyue had no words of rebuttal and left with a pale, sullen face. "Zheng Lianyuan, did I frighten you?" Feng Zhiyun looked at me with concern, her expression filled with helplessness. "Don't bother with her. She had a close relationship with His Highness in her youth, and her maternal family is prestigious, so she's used to being arrogant. If she makes things difficult for you in the future, just send someone to find me." I shifted my gaze. This seemed like an attempt to win me over, but I wasn't interested in the scheming here. I bowed and said, "Thank you for your concern, Crown Princess. I will behave myself. I won't cause trouble." Feng Zhiyun understood my meaning and wasn't angry. She smiled and said, "Then Zheng Lianyuan, rest well." That night, the woman's bitter and unwilling voice, accompanied by the sound of porcelain shattering, echoed throughout the East Palace. Han Yi, who served me, complained, "What's Zhao Yangyuan throwing a fit about now?" I remained unmoved. Don't complain. There will be more difficult days ahead. The prophecy came true. In the following days, I stayed behind closed doors, while Zhao Fengyue continued to stand at the door and say a few words. Feng Zhiyun initially watched coldly and later only came forward to dissuade Zhao Fengyue with the demeanor of a crown princess. But Zhao Fengyue didn't know that I had heard far worse things than her dirty talk 1,000 times over. Her words were merely trivial. Just as I thought life would continue like this, peace was shattered one rainy night. 9. When Zhao Fengyue handed me the silver hairpin from Aunt Li, my heart, which had been trembling with anxiety, dropped straight into the abyss. I could no longer remain indifferent. My hand trembled as I held the silver hairpin, and my voice carried a slight quiver. "Zhao Fengyue, what are you trying to do?" Zhao Fengyue sneered. "What am I doing? I'm just kindly informing Zheng Lianyuan. There has been unrest in a village in the southwest. My father was sent to suppress it and has captured hundreds of rioters who are being escorted to the capital for execution. I noticed that among them there seemed to be some old acquaintances of Zheng Lianyuan, so I came to inform you." "It's impossible. How could Aunt Li and the others be rioters?" I protested. "How is it impossible?" Zhao Fengyue's smile became more carefree. "My father says they are, so they must be." "Zhao Fengyue." My eyes were bloodshot, glaring at her angrily. But I knew that in such a situation, it wasn't about who shouted the loudest. So I could only despondently kneel on the ground, wagging my tail like a dog, pleading, "What do you want? If I can, I want nothing. I just want you to be unhappy. Why should a lowly concubine like you have the prince's child, while I've spent years seeking a child with no result?" She said, pressing her foot against my belly. I want you to suffer with me. Tears streamed down my face as all my grievances surged out. Why are you torturing me so? Did I wrong you? Did I bear a child with another woman behind your back? You have so much jealousy. Why don't you direct it at Mu? Why do you have to make things difficult for someone else who is also suffering? You know very well that I am not the instigator. But you still deceive yourself, thinking I seduce Mu, blaming all your misfortune on me. Why do you involve innocent people? But Zhao Fengyue squatted down, her dark eyes devoid of any light. I love him too much. Zhengwan, I can't bear to blame him. As long as you're gone, his heart will only have me. We, she smiled with a naive expression, will be as good as before. With that, she coldly pushed me to the ground. As she looked down, it was as if she was gazing at an ant that everyone trampled on. Her voice grew fainter, but her words were like sharp blades. Zhengwan, you are wrong. You're wrong for saving him, and for letting him love you. Liang Yuan. Han Yi hurried to support me, and was calling for the imperial physician. Han Yi. I gripped her hand tightly, sweat pouring from my forehead. But I held back my pain and said, don't make a fuss. Don't call the imperial physician. Take me to see Mu. Liang Yuan. Han Yi looked at my wet clothes in a daze. Take me to see him, Han Yi, I shouted. Only then did Han Yi snap out of her daze, hurriedly going out to arrange for a carriage. The carriage jolted and stopped along the way, causing my stomach to ache even more. But when I saw Pei Ji, I couldn't care about the pain and knelt down. I deeply bowed. I begged him to remember our past feelings and save Aunt Li and the others. But this time, I became what he wanted me to be. Pei Ji remained unmoved. He merely sighed lightly, stood up, and helped me up. Wan, their priorities. Please think of me. I didn't understand why a case of wrongful accusations needed to be pondered over. Even overturning the case would be a matter of probability. But because the Zhao family was under his jurisdiction, he didn't want to risk his own position and watched hundreds of villagers die. Pei Ji, do you truly have no heart? I shook off his hand, but the intense pain caused me to collapse on the ground. Wan, Pei Ji noticed the blood on my clothes and anxiously picked me up. In the haze, I felt tears falling on my face. Pei Ji said, Wan, they won't die in vain. One day, I will make the Zhao family pay for their blood debts. I still had some strength left, but with my lips slightly parted, I couldn't speak. After all, I didn't believe him.
10.
I gave birth to the East Palace's first son, the true first grandson of the Empress. The Empress, who had always looked down on me, finally deigned to bestow upon me the rank of Liangdi, a rank of consort. Yet, I pushed aside the honor and knelt before her. I sought not riches or honors. I only hoped she would show mercy and save the people of my village. The Empress's smile faded. She glanced at Pei Ji and then played with Cheer for a while. After a long pause, she declared, the decree has been issued and cannot be undone. However, I will permit you to visit them in prison. Do not ask for more, or you may not even get that. With those words, she resumed her affectionate smile and happily carried Cheer around the hall. Pei Ji wanted to say something to me. As he reached for my shoulder, I coldly moved away. Accompanied by Han Ye, I went to the prison. Perhaps having been in a place of wealth and privilege for too long, the sight before me filled me with fear and disgust. The damp and cold air was occasionally punctuated by the clinking of chains. Under the guard's lead, I walked slowly forward. Guan, Aunt Li, now emaciated and unrecognizable, still had her hair neatly arranged. Seeing me, she reached out to pull me. But upon seeing my luxurious attire, she hesitated, pulling her hand back. I grasped her hand firmly and knelt down on the ground. Aunt Li, it's all my fault. I shouldn't have saved him. I shouldn't have. I'm the one who brought you all to this terrible state. It's all my fault. All my fault. I began slapping my own face in repentance. I slapped hard, but the pain was too much over these days. For a moment, I couldn't even feel it. Guan. Aunt Li, heartbroken, held my hand. It's not your fault. Saving people is not wrong. It is a virtue. It's their fault for harboring evil intentions. They are the ones who forced you into this situation. Guan Guan. Aunt Li cried as well. Promise me, you must leave, you must. This is not a place for you. Staying here, you will truly die. She wiped her tears and continued. Uncle Chen passed away on the way to the capital. Before he died, he told me. He had once foretold our fate. If you were entangled with Pei Ji, your life would be filled with turmoil and end poorly. But he didn't dare to say it. He was afraid. Aunt Li choked up, afraid of changing fate and losing his life. He wanted to stay with me a bit longer. Actually, his predictions were always accurate. He had calculated that I would die early if I stayed with him. So he cruelly changed our fate and pushed me to another. As a result, he lost his sight. That's why he didn't dare to speak. But Guan Guan, Uncle Chen truly cared for you. He couldn't bear to see things go wrong. He revealed the fate too early and passed away. I beg you, do not betray our efforts. You must return home. Even if everyone is gone, it's still your home. Return home, Guan Guan. My tears had long dried on that day. I deeply bowed to Aunt Li and said, Rest assured, Aunt Li. I will definitely return home. 11. Aunt Li and the others did not die in vain. During the change of imperial power, when Pei Ji ascended the throne, it became his greatest evidence to eradicate the Zhao family. I heard Zhao Fengyue's unwilling cries. My heart did not feel satisfaction. Zhao Fengyue may have been the villain, but Pei Ji was the ultimate beneficiary. He trampled on human lives, observing coldly, just to make each move in his game. His heart, his blood, from within to without, was cold. A month before his enthronement, on Qier's first birthday, he, drunk, barged into my room. He clutched my hand tightly and repeatedly asked, Awan, tell me, what must we do to return to how we were before? What must I do for you to continue loving me? Awan, I was really wrong. Please, don't treat me like this. I let him ramble until he became calm and then said, Actually, we were never wrong from the start. But, Pei Ji, you should not have imposed your will upon me. I will not forgive you, and I will not love you again. I gently touched my chest, have already given up. When did Pei Ji and I become estranged? Was it from the moment he began to recover his memory, but chose not to speak? Or when he used the villagers to coerce me, treating me as a possession? Or perhaps it was at this very moment. But no matter how it was, we had drifted apart. I had always loved the Pei Ji, who was full of affection for me, not the Pei Ji consumed by power and calculation. From the moment he remembered who he was, we were doomed. Feng Jian often visited me. I knew she wanted to raise Qier as her own, so I simply requested that Qier be given to her. She could not bear children, and Qier was the first son, which was important for the Feng family's future. She would also raise Qier as her own and take great care of him. This was the best I could do as a mother for my child. When Feng Jiyun took Qier away, after sending everyone else off, she said to me, Thank you. There's no need to thank me, consort. Qier will have another fate with you. I actually know. I know you allowed Zhao Fengyue to bully me on purpose, and that there's no sincerity in your kindness. But I had no choice. Consort, I think it's best to follow your wishes. In fact, I admire you. You've always been so earnest, with no personal interest. Aren't you tired? Feng Jiyun's eyes turned red. But I was born as the crown prince's consort. Guan Guan, I also had no choice. Saying this, Feng Jiyun patted my hand. Guan Guan, accept your fate, and don't be at odds with the crown prince anymore. For many years to come, you and I will still rely on him to live. I shook my head and smiled brightly. Under Feng Jiyun's puzzled gaze, I softly said, Consort, do you believe it? I can fly. I have choices, and I will not clip my own wings. In the end, I will be like a bird, flying to my own home. 12. The auspicious day for the enthronement chosen by the Astronomical Bureau was indeed perfect. The sky was clear and cloudless. Even the usually quiet imperial city, resembling a birdcage, seemed to come alive. We followed behind Pei Ji step by step, as if we were his puppets. But even in such a solemn occasion, I could still occasionally feel Feng Zhiyun's worried gaze. I thought it was unfair for her as a noble consort to be concerned about a mere village woman on such an important day. So, when she glanced at me again, I made sure my figure was fully visible to her. Feng Zhiyun, I wish you to be a good empress. The change came so swiftly that before she could even react in shock, I had already run out. I ran faster and faster, with the rising sun lighting up my path home. I knew that if I followed the light, I would surely find my way home. By the time Pei Ji and the others reacted, I had already climbed the city wall. The cold wind howled, stinging my face and blowing open my cloak. Underneath was Aunt Li's wedding dress. Though the dress was somewhat worn, it remained a fiery red, igniting my once dormant heart. Zhengguan. Behind me, Pei Ji's heart-wrenching cries echoed, but I did not look back or stop. He thought that having a child would make me settle down. He thought that by teaching me court etiquette, I would be tamed. He thought that by draping me in this embroidered pearl robe and placing a heavy phoenix crown upon me, I would accept my fate. Why should it always be what he thinks? I am human, not his domesticated animal or puppet. I want to live according to my own heart. I am willing to live like a bird reborn from death, to live my own life. Without hesitation, I leaped from the city tower. Like a bird escaping a cage, spreading its wings to soar high. The sensation of weightlessness made my mind and vision blur. In a daze, I saw Aunt Li, Blind Chen, and everyone in the village. They waved at me, telling me to hurry home before it got dark. Tears streamed from my eyes, and at this moment, I finally showed a genuine smile. I laughed heartily. I said, "Aunt Li, I'm coming home."